What's up everybody, how's it going? Now, a well set up mountain bike isn't just good for the rider, but it's also really good for the bike as well to get the most out of its performance. So things like how well your suspension's set up, your wheels, your tires, changing gear, how the bike's gonna handle and track the ground, all of these things, well, they can make a huge difference to your runs. So today in this video, we are gonna look at almost every single adjustment that you can make to your push bike to get the absolute most out of it. But before we do that, why not give us a little like and a subscribe, just because it helps support the channel, show a little love and you get more amazing free content. Let's start at the front of the bike then, the cockpit area. So things like bar, stem and lever setup. To begin with, let's talk stem. Now stem length can change and is kind of indicative of what riding style you do. So a longer stem you may see more on a cross-country bike. That's going to elongate your body, give you sort of much better control, give you a more aero position like that. If you're more of an enduro or downhill rider, dirt jumper especially, a shorter stem, so something like a 35 to a 50 mil, is going to bring the weight back ever so slightly and give you a more direct steering feel as well. Right, you want to make sure, obviously, once you've got your stem length dialed in, that it's set up nice and straight. It's really easy to have it ever so slightly on the squiff left or right. And a great trick to do this is actually to look down the back of the bars and get them lined up with the crown of the fork. So if you have a look down, check out this shot now, you'll see that there is no gap between each side of the crown. So it is dead nice and straight. And then once you have got your stem length dialed in and maybe you've straightened up and been a little test ride, depending on what you do ride, you might want to then have a little play with the height of that stem stack, so the spaces on top or below. Now moving it up or down is going to change your body position, either more over the front or further back, depending on how steep it gets, and actually changing the feel of that reach as well. So the higher you bring it up, the more it's ever going to slightly bring the reach of the bars back. So next up then, it's handlebars. Now, when it comes to width, I really do think that's dependent upon the rider. More slight, smaller riders, we're gonna want a slightly narrower bar, maybe around the 700 mil, but obviously a bigger rider or a broader shouldered rider is gonna want a slightly wider handlebar. So bars are generally between 700 to 760s. Bigger guys might be running up to 800s or even 820s. If you're a big tall guy, got big broad shoulders like that, you might want that nice wide stance. But I would say nowadays the go-to is kind of 760 and then maybe you can go down from there. But obviously, just remember, you can cut down, you can't really add on, not properly. When it comes to up sweep and back sweep, that's going to be really useful to change your position on the bike without changing the actual reach too much. So if you, especially the rise, with the rise of the bars coming up, you're not going to change the reach, but you are going to change your body position. So have a little think about that too when you're choosing your bars. You can generally get bars from dead flat, so a 0 mil rise, up to a 50 mil rise. Whoa. So next up, we've got our bar and stem sorted. We're going to look at the setup of our control, so dropper, shifter, brake levers and things like that. So we can slide them back and forth on the handlebar to get the right reach. So we want them, once you're using one finger on the brake, the lever or the end of the lever should be sitting nicely sort of within the knuckle of your forefinger there to get the most power to pull it in. You also shouldn't have your finger reaching really far for it or bending one way or the other. And again, the same with the thumb paddles for your shifter or your dropper as well. They want to be in a nice ergonomical position so that you're not reaching really far down or up or actually having to move your hand along the bar to be able to press them. Try and get them as comfortable position as you can. A great little hack here then when setting up all your lever positions are integrating clamps. So things like my Shimano setup here, the shifter and the brake lever actually clamp just using one clamp. So the shifter's bolted to the bottom of it, but it's still able to slide back and forth. So I can set my lever up at a nice angle. So I run mine fairly flat, so when it gets steeper, they're still easy to reach rather than reaching down here. And then on that underneath, I can swizzle my shifter further around so that my thumb is able to reach both of those paddles nice and easy. And I do exactly the same thing on the other side for the dropper lever. And then, like I said, if you can see that brake lever hook is just sitting nicely at the end of my forefinger for maximum power. We're going to talk drivetrain next. So things like cranks, chainring, cassette, mech, pedals, all of these can be adjusted and adapted to suit the rider's needs. So things like your crank length, if you're a shorter rider, you might look at 165 mil crank. If you're a taller rider, a 175, just to accommodate the longer legs on you. The same with a chainring, obviously smaller chainring, easier for climbing, larger, getting that power down is going to be a lot better, especially when compared to generally 11 or a 12 speed cassette these days. But obviously with the wide range cassettes, you've got to think about what size chainring you're going to run up front, just to not make things too easy. So you're not even going to top out at the bottom and be spinning, and likewise it's not going to be a really hard gear even if you are up there in first. Pedals, obviously clips or flats, your choice. If you like to get a little loosey-goosey, get on the flat pedals. If you're a bit of a mile muncher sometimes, or it gets really rough, you're a bit of a downhiller, clipless could be the one for you. Poorly set up gears then are going to be the bane of your ride. Get your gears running silky smooth, well then there's absolutely nothing to worry about. So diving on in straight away. Gears have got stop screws at the back, so 2 screws that you'll see top and bottom. Basically what these do is essentially stop the chain being pushed too far off the top of the mech or coming too far off of the bottom. You'll be able to see which does which actually on the mech. There is also a B tension screw which tensions the mech itself, essentially pulling that one back if I was to tighten it up. Now what you want to do is have it so that there's about a 3 to 5 mil gap between the top jockey wheel and the largest sprocket when you shift up into that first gear. That way it's going to keep it nice and tight on the chain. Same with the gear cable, keep it running nice and smooth. It's going to need replacing potentially every 6 months, but it depends how much you ride, because these things, they stretch, they get grimy, and when that starts to happen, well then the performance of your gears is definitely going to deteriorate. Moving on up then, we're going to talk seat post and saddle, because there's a lot of variations out there. So if you're running a dropper post, you want the full extension of the dropper to be roughly, obviously, at your comfortable riding height. Now that might have to change the height of the dropper depending upon the insertion length, so the amount that can drop into the frame. And then when we move up to saddles, well, it can be an absolute minefield out there, but if you go to your local bike shop, a lot of the good ones out there will actually be able to measure your sit bones. If they don't, well then fear not, a bit of corrugated cardboard, a little bit ghetto, I know, you can still get the same effect. So when you sit on it, the indentations will show you the width roughly of your sit bones. So might help you decide on actually how wide a saddle you need. My top tip here would be to try as many as you can, because you're going to be spending a lot of time on it, and then no one wants a sore butt, let's put it that way. So try and find the right saddle that's going to suit you the best. The final piece of our basic bike setup then, before we do start to delve into something slightly more in depth, is wheels and tyres. Now, there are obviously vast amounts to choose from out there, so you want to choose depending upon your discipline. So on my big enduro bike here, I have obviously got big enduro tyres, so 2.6, thick casing, really aggressive tread patterns, basically so that's to absorb impact, try and avoid punctures and have the most grip as possible. I've decided to mount those onto some aluminium wheels, because again, aluminium wheels are great for just taking the hits. They're going to be harder to break, and if they do break, you can generally kind of bodge them or fix them. But if you are an XC racer, you might want to go for weight and stiffness and performance, power transfer, things like that. So you might go for a narrower carbon wheel. A wider rim is going to give you a much more rounded tyre profile, especially with these big 2.6s, whereas a narrower rim is going to give a sort of a more ballooned, narrower look to the tyre, which is great for a fast rolling kind of bike setup. When it comes to the pressures that you run in your tyre, and maybe even inserts, again, if you're riding really gnarly, rough terrain, really rocky stuff, you might want to put inserts maybe in just the back or front and rear. Pressures though, when it comes to pressures, well, let's just put it this way. If you go too soft, you're going to get punctures, no matter just how thick a tyre you do have. So my range is roughly between 18 to 25. So actually, for my general setup, it's 25 at the back, 23 PSI up front, but this does range obviously depending upon your weight, your riding style, and the type of riding that you do. So have a little play around here, see what's going to give you the most grip and rolling abilities without sort of maybe that chance of getting a pinch puncture. Yikes. Right, it's time to get advanced, because before all those kind of things I mentioned on how you would adapt and adjust your bike are going to get you really comfortable on your bike, but these next ones, well, they're really going to get the bike dialed in performance-wise. So we're going to talk all things suspension now and just run through what all the little twizzly knobs and dials actually do. Firstly, on your suspension, you're going to need to set the sag. Now, this is how much it sits into its travel whilst you're sitting or stationary on your bike, if you like. Now, it's really important to do this because it's going to dictate just how much of that travel that you use. And obviously, you don't want to be blowing through it all or bottoming out all the time. Now, it's normally measured in a percentage, so around the 20 to 30% mark. And that is measured in various different ways. But actually, for a really in-depth video on how to do it properly, well, Doddy over on Tech has covered this and it is a gem. So head down to the description below where that video is linked and you can get your suspension front and rear absolutely dialed. Next up, you've dialed in your sag. It's time for the compression and the rebound. Now, this depends upon the models of suspension that you have, but there's also things like high and low speed compression and rebound. So compression is the amount of force that you'll need to actually make that suspension squish together. And the rebound is the amount of speed that there is to return the suspension. Now again, the Dodster has killed it with videos on this, and those videos are linked in the description below so that you can get that setup absolutely dialed. And that's going to work actually for air suspension like my forks on the front, or coil shocks or air rear shocks as well, just so that you can get the setup of your bike absolutely dialed. But I would recommend taking the time to do this and testing out some different settings and trying some on different tracks, because the more knowledge you can build up, the better the ride is going to be. But would you Adam and Eve it, we're at the end of the video. That is pretty much almost every adjustment that you can make to your bike. I do hope it's been of some help for you. If there's more adjustments or you want to know about, let me know in the description down below. If you like this one, give us a little thumbs up as always. But for me, for now, I am out of here. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.